Hello writers, come write with me. My name is Mykela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Write with Mykela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Today we are reading Chapter 2, Far-Fetched Hope, and Chapter 3, To Find a Cure. Last Friday we read Chapter 1. If you didn't watch or listen to Chapter 1, you didn't miss much. I set up the story, I introduced my three main characters with some of their history, and I did a little setup for the antagonist. You also briefly met two characters who reside in the city of the ancients, and before I introduced those characters, I showed the viewers a symbol I use for my readers to signal my readers to switch, or that I'm switching scenes. I would like to remind everybody that this story is a rough draft and PG-13. Also, don't forget to share your chapters 2 and 3 once you complete it or them. I will need permission to read each chapter on the channel, even if you sent permission with your first chapter. I'm not promising to read all the chapters I've sent on the channel, but I do hope to read your chapters. Send chapters with written permission to writewithmykela@gmail.com. Don't forget guardian permission and pen name if you're under 18. When I read your chapters, it will be a second video on Friday, so that my channel, people know what to expect and they know which story they're listening to when they pick a video on Friday. I can't wait to read your stories. That's where I'm going to have a lot of fun, and I hope that my viewers do too. I'm hoping they're going to enjoy my story and your story. All the chapters that I read on this channel are copyright protected by their original writers, and no one may use any part for their own writings. Now let's start reading Chapter 2, Far-Fetched Hope. Kyltie paused outside Dr. Highhand's door. The wind stirred up the dust and seemingly opened the door. Kyltie quietly pushed the door the rest of the way open, and she and Kyltie stepped inside. Dr. Highhands jerked awake and jumped out of his chair. "Oh, hello! Good afternoon! What brings you here?" Kyltie set Kyltie on the doctor's table and showed him the spot on Kyltie's leg. "A snake bite," answered Kyltie. Dr. Highhands looked at Kyltie's leg closely. "Snake bite? This doesn't look like a snake bite. This looks like a lashing from a ravenous viporous. I've never seen one myself, but I have a book with the description." Kyltie raised her eyebrows. She thought, if he hasn't ever seen one before, how can he so quickly diagnose it? Dr. Highhands retrieved the book. The description he read matched Kyltie's description of the snake, and the description also described her wound. Kyltie read the entry herself. The book said that the ravenous viporous had a tongue with edges sharper than any knife known to mortals. The book said one could only find the snake inside the ring of the mountains. The ravenous viporous was not a natural creature of the land, but it was a mutation made and bred by the ancients in the city of the ancients. "Folks, I can apply herbs and a wrap. I can help with the stiffness and the swelling, but I can't remove all the poison," stated Dr. Highhands. "From what this book says here, she may live up to another 10 years, but the poison will cause her to catch every sickness and infection she comes in contact with." "And?" pressed Kyltie. "And nothing," replied Dr. Highhands. "She may live 10 years, or she may die tomorrow. The book says the only cure is within the city of the ancients, if such a cure exists. The book says the cure will heal the wound completely, with not even a trace of a scar." "If the cure exists," restated Kyltie. "If the city exists," remarked Dr. Highhands, "I think the city is a myth, a place where you have knowledge of cures for every ailment, including age? That is ridiculous. But it was enticement enough for many a fool in ages past to brave that treacherous forest. None ever made it back out. My guess is that a person needs such a city if he or she dares enter into the forest. The forest has every danger known to mortals. If such a city exists, and if you made it there and received your cure, you would be a damn fool to try to come out again, back through the forest of doom. Kyltie wasn't impressed with Dr. Highhand's gloom and doom story. Even little Kyltie didn't look impressed. Kyltie, however, asked to borrow the book so that she could get the full story. Dr. Highhands did what he could, and he gave Kyltie and Kyltie instructions on the care for Kyltie's wound. Kyltie and Kyltie made their way back across the village to their house with Kyltie before the day cooled off enough for the villagers to venture out. Once inside their quaint home, Kyltie scolded Kyltie. "Why did you do this? Why did you wander off?" Kyltie stepped between them and said, "Did you not suggest that she play? Did you not pick our picnic spot? This is not her fault." "You're right," sighed Kyltie. "Kyltie, go upstairs and rest. I'll wake you when it's time to change your bandage." Kyltie limped towards the staircase. Kyltie promptly lifted her up. He quickly ascended the stairs with Kyltie on his heels. Kyltie went about opening the windows to get a fresh breeze. Then she sat to read the book, City of the Ancients. When the lights began to fade, Kyltie lit an oil lamp for Kyltie. Then he tended to Kyltie. Kyltie knew Kyltie would read until she could no longer keep her eyes open. Sure enough, well past midnight, when Kyltie checked on Kyltie, she was sound asleep, and the oil lamp burned low. But strange enough, as he looked around the room, he saw all the windows and shutters closed and locked. Kyltie set the book on their little table and carried Kyltie up the second flight of stairs to the sleeping rooms. He gently laid her in the bed, crawled in beside her, and fell asleep once again. Okay, writers, that is the end of chapter 2. It is very short, but in my opinion, it had everything it needed. However, I'm sure we want more story right now, so I'll read chapter 3 as well today. I titled chapter 3, To Find a Cure. Let's keep reading. In the morning, when Kyltie awoke, Kyltie was downstairs making breakfast. Kyltie was with Kyltie. Kyltie descended the stairs. As he descended the stairs, he could hear Kyltie telling Kyltie what she had read. He paused and smiled to himself. He knew Kyltie could practically recite the things that she had read word for word. Of course, Kyltie had a habit of changing or adding adjectives and adverbs. So, in essence, Kyltie added her own flair in her retelling. Kyltie listened. And then it talked about these magnificent stones called orb keys. The ancients made these beautiful stones magically, and only 3 people from each following generation could use these wonderful stones. There were several conditions, Kyltie recited. She turned to the table with 2 plates of eggs, soft bread, and ham. She stopped mid-stride. "Kyltie, good morning. I hope I didn't wake you." Kyltie turned. "Good morning, Dad." Kyltie made a face. "Why do you insist on calling me that when we're alone?" "Kyltie, you're impossible," stated Kyltie. "She's just doing what Mr. Volkov told her to do." "But that is only in the village. She doesn't need to use it at home or in private. You know she's not really my daughter. I wish the villagers knew that. I hate what they think of me." "Kyltie, that's enough," said Kyltie with a raised voice. "I've never seen a man so paranoid in all my life." "I'm not paranoid," returned Kyltie. "Forget it. You will never understand. Just give me breakfast and tell us the conditions." "What conditions?" asked Kyltie. "The conditions for the orb keys and where they are," stated Kyltie. "Oh," replied Kirsche. She set down the plates and turned back to the little wood stove. The three had to be siblings, with 7 years between the first two and 7 years between the last two. The book even went into hair color and eye color. "Do you want to know all of that?" she asked. She momentarily glanced back at Kirian. "No," responded Kirian. "I do," whined Kyltie. Oh, I guess it would be, "I do," whined Kyltie. Kirsche dished up her food and sat to the table. "From what I understand in the book, the ancients hid the orb keys 7 generations ago." "Well, I guess that depends on how many years you consider to be in a generation. Kirsche, your calculation is fine. Where are the keys hidden?" "It said the formation of information of the location of the orb keys begins under a hollow rock near the northwest shore." "Under a hollow rock," repeated Kirian. "A cave entrance," Kirsche stated simply. "Can we go? We can start looking near the port. I could pull Kyltie in our little cart." "Why? Why do you want to go?" asked Kirian. "It's better than sitting here all day, washing clothes and cooking," replied Kirsche. "Come on, Kirian. You haven't even tried to find work since we arrived, so it isn't going to interrupt your livelihood." "I'm not worried about livelihood," replied Kirian. "We have our pool of money from our parents." "Okay, how about this? It will give you good reason to leave the village for several days," stated Kirsche smugly. Kirian smiled. He loved Kirsche. One day he would tell her of his love. "Okay, we will go." "Yay!" shouted Kyltie. "Have you already prepared the cart?" Kirian asked. Kirsche smiled. "Well, almost. I have everything in that bag over there. I just haven't carried it downstairs." "Let me put out the fire," said Kirian. "Then I'll carry the bag down. I'll come back to carry Kyltie. Kirsche, make sure and shut the shutters when you close the windows." "Of course," said Kirsche. "How small do you think my mind to be?" "It's not that," started Kirian. "I know. Geez, you are always so serious," stated Kirsche. Kirian finished his meal and started his task. Kirsche and Kyltie winked at each other. "Kyltie, can you wash up the dishes?" Kirsche asked as she dropped her plate in the little washing tub. "Yes, ma'am. Can you put the tub on the floor for me?" responded Kyltie. "I'm one step ahead of you," replied Kirsche. They set about their task. It was mid-morning before they left. Again, the sun burned hot. The girls again wore bonnets, and Kirian wore a straw hat, for now the sun was at their backs. Kirian pulled the cart most of the time, but Kirsche pulled it some to give Kirian a break. Mr. Volkov entered Dr. Highhand's office. "Good morning," said Dr. Highhands. "How may I help you?" "I've asked around the village to see if anyone knows whether or not the Klinhausers made it back to the village yesterday after their picnic. They still have closed shutters this morning, which isn't like Kirsche, so I knocked on their door and there was no answer." Dr. Highhands let out a heavy sigh. "Kirian and Kirsche brought Kyltie in here yesterday afternoon." "Kyltie got hurt again?" exclaimed Mr. Volkov. "Worse," stated Dr. Highhands. "She got a lashing from a ravenous vaporus." "A ravenous vaporus? How? Those aren't in the field to the west." "I don't know. I never go out there. And I've never heard of anyone else coming in contact with them either." Mr. Volkov sighed. "I better spread the word, though. None of the women should go berry picking." "Oh," said Dr. Highhands. "I hadn't thought of that." "Well, where are the Klinhausers now?" "I don't know," replied Dr. Highhands. "Perhaps they headed to the city of the ancients." I didn't think of that possibility either when I let Kirsche borrow my book about the city. I forgot the exuberance of youth. "Oh dear, this is bad," stated Mr. Volkov. "But I suppose there is nothing we can really do if we don't know which direction they went." "No, I don't suppose so," agreed Dr. Highhands. Mr. Volkov left and spread the news throughout the village about the ravenous vaporous in the field to the west of the village. At lunch, Kyrsia pulled out some hard biscuits and ham strips. Today they would wash down their meal with a bit of milk. But after today, they would have to depend on their water supply. If they kept up their pace, then by the third evening they would reach the river. Or if they stopped for lunches, then by mid-afternoon of their fourth day of traveling, they would reach the river. Then they could follow the river northwest to the small port. They didn't talk much as they walked. They hadn't ever really talked about anything other than, what do you want to eat? Do you want to go for a picnic? So they knew very little about one another's past, but each thought of his own past quite often. Shortly following the loss of their families, the wise seers brought them together. Now they lived together here in a village unknown to them prior to this. In the evening they had a small fire, so Kyrsia could see better to do her embroidery. Kyrsia worked on her stitches while she asked Kyltie questions in math. Kyltie answered, 12. Kyrsia had been counting stitches. She stopped. What was your answer? Kyltie repeated, 12. And what was the problem? Asked Kyrsia. 3 times 4, answered Kyltie. Oh, yes, that is correct. Kyrsia looked down at her work and counted again. She said, now I have 12 stitches when I only need 10. She pulled the needle off the thread and started pulling out stitches. Kirian, you can continue her lessons. Kirian was lying on his side. He rose up to his elbow. Kyrsia, don't you think she has done enough? The rooster will crow soon, he teased. You can't keep her up all night doing math. But, started Kyrsia. And, interrupted Kirian, I haven't heard her miss one yet. Kyrsia let out a sigh and then rethreaded her needle. You know what I think? Started Kirian. He wanted to tease Kyrsia a little bit more, but he was afraid of that she would take it wrong. He decided to try it anyway. Now, what do you think? Asked Kyrsia without looking up. Yeah, what do you think? Asked Kyltie excitedly. Kirian glanced at Kyltie. He smiled. I think the one who needs the math lessons is you, Kyrsia. You can't even count. Kyrsia dropped her hands to her lap and said, what? Then she saw Kirian smile. She pushed her eyebrows together and gave Kirian a half smile. She looked back down to her work and said, Kirian, just give Kyltie one more problem. If she gets it right, then she can go to bed. But it has to be a hard one. Kyltie cheered. Kirian said, okay, Kyltie, what is 200 divided by 2? I can't do that, exclaimed Kyltie. It's too hard. It's not too hard, stated Kyrsia as she started to get up. Kirian held up his hand. No, Kyrsia, you count. I'll help Kyltie. Kyrsia went back to her work, and Kirian went to Kyltie. He pulled some grass up and tossed it aside, so Kyltie and he could work the problem in the dirt. Kyltie didn't complain because she knew Kyrsia would never let her play in the dirt. After some time, Kyltie got the problem right, and Kirian went back to his blanket while Kyltie continued to draw in the dirt. Kirian watched Kyrsia. Occasionally she would pull a small piece of parchment out and look at it closely. She seemed to be counting something. Finally Kirian asked, Kyrsia, what are you doing? Kyrsia didn't look up. I'm sitting on the moon. What does it look like I'm doing? Kyltie burst out laughing. Seriously, Kyrsia, said Kirian, why do you keep looking at the piece of parchment that is in your apron? Kyrsia pulled it out and looked at Kirian. This? She asked. Yes, that, replied Kirian. My design is on here. Each shape is for a different color thread, but I'm really frustrated because I miscalculated how much violet thread I would need. But you can always get berries to dye some more thread, put in Kirian. No, because the color will vary between dye sets. Kyrsia looked up. Kirian looked confused. He said, so you draw your design first? Yes. Then you dye all the thread you're going to need for the entire piece. And finally, you stitch it while counting every single stitch. Yes? Kirian shook his head. Don't get me wrong, Kyrsia, but no man who has ever lived could have such patience with so many details. Your pieces are always lovely and quite exquisite, but that's too much. How do you calculate how much thread you need? Kirian threw up his hands. I don't need an answer. Kirian, sometimes I think you have only half a mind, stated Kyrsia. Kyltie just listened. To say you don't have patience with details is a complete and utter lie. I remember when you started the headboard to our bed. At first, I thought you had gone mad because I had never seen anyone mar up a piece of wood like you were proceeding to do. Kirian chuckled. He never knew her thoughts about his carving. Anyway, continued Kyrsia, when you finished, the headboard was absolutely gorgeous. I was so disappointed that you did not sell it. You could have gotten a whole sack full of maces. Plus, everyone else in the village would have ordered one, and then we would have all the money we needed for life, or at least a good number of years. Why didn't you sell it? Why did you hide the beautiful thing in our room? I'm so afraid I'll scratch it, and then we won't be able to sell it. I've oiled it down twice just to keep it nice. Kirian sighed. Kyrsia, I didn't make that for the village. I made it for you. To me, you are so beautiful that I thought you deserved something equally beautiful to accent your bed, or at least something prettier than the headboard we had. Kyrsia looked down and started putting away her embroidery. She knew she wasn't beautiful. Her adopting parents had told her plenty of times that she was too ugly. She thought of disputing Kirian, but didn't. Kyltie bounced with excitement. You are beautiful, she exclaimed. She stumbled a little. Then she sat quickly. She hoped Kyrsia didn't notice that she had slightly hurt her leg when she had bounced up. Kirian wasn't sure how to interpret Kyrsia's downcast mood. He thought of how she would look pregnant. He wanted to marry her for real and for them to have children together, but he didn't have the confidence to say anything more. What's pregnant mean? Asked Kyltie as she heard the word whispered on the wind. It's when a baby is growing in a woman's stomach, Kyrsia answered quickly. Kirian looked up and wondered if he had spoken out loud. He figured he must have. Otherwise, Kyltie wouldn't have blurted out such a question. He wondered how much he had said. Oh, said Kyltie. How does a baby get there? Kyrsia raised her eyebrows. I see you're ready for some more lessons. No, said Kyltie. She lay down on her blanket. Kyrsia, started Kirian, as he tried to gain confidence. Mr. Volkov doesn't seem to care about what he is doing to us by making us keep up this facade. Kyrsia, let me speak. You're of the age to have a baby of your own, but... Kirian, I have Kyltie. I don't need a baby of my own. And since we're on the subject, I'll tell you that I don't mind if Kyltie calls me Mom. So you can tell the village that Mr. Volkov misinformed them or he misunderstood you. Tell the village that she is my daughter, not yours. Kirian laughed. He shook his head and dropped his head down into his hands. After a few minutes, he looked up and said, Kyrsia, that's impossible. You would have been 6 when you had become pregnant. Kirian laughed again. I appreciate the offer, but Kyltie can't be your daughter. Well, let's get some sleep before the roosters really do crow. Kyrsia lay down. Kirian lay down too. He wished the breeze blowing earlier still blew, but it had stopped abruptly. Suddenly the wind blew strongly. The ashes and sparks from the fire flew up. Kirian quickly jumped to his feet and kicked dirt on the fire to put it out. After the fire was out, he gazed down at Kyrsia. Kyrsia pushed up to her elbow. Her eyes darted around. She whispered, What is it, Kirian? Do you hear something? She met his gaze. He smiled at her. "No, I just think you're beautiful, and I'd like to wish you a good night's sleep." "I hope you sleep well too, Kirian. Don't worry about Kyltie. We will find her cure." Kirian turned back to his blanket. He knew when Kyrshia changed the subject like that, she didn't want to revisit the first one. He felt foolish for not being able to tell Kyrshia that he loved her. He cursed himself for that failure. Soon he drifted off to sleep as a gentle breeze blew. This breeze was different than before. It felt warmer, like maybe it was from the ocean. "How are they doing, dear?" Arik asked Orisha. Orisha smiled slightly. "They've just lain down to sleep. The first day of their journey was fine." Arik sat on the bed beside his wife. He put his arm around her and pulled her close. "Kyrshia will find the map room." "I'm not worried about that," Orisha said softly. "Well, what is it then?" "Kirian wants to tell Kyrshia he loves her." "That's great!" exclaimed Arik. "No. Kirian doesn't have the courage to tell her. He lacks his confidence. And even if he believed in himself, Dante hurt Kyrshia too badly for her to open up to anyone." "Give them time," stated Arik. "They will be alone now for several days, without the Snoopy villagers. They will come together." "I hope so, for the sake of us all." Orisha looked up into Arik's eyes. "How is Revis?" "I wish I could say he is better, but he is not. I see fear in his eyes, but he won't talk about it. He just says he made a bad mistake." Orisha's eyes grew wide. "A mistake? So it is true? What we feared could happen, can happen?" "Orisha, dear, I don't know. I'm not sure he knows. Perhaps that is why he won't say." Arik kissed his wife's head. "Come, let us get some rest. Nothing will happen while they sleep." Orisha smiled slightly. She got up and put the orb on the small pillow on her dressing table. Then they went to bed. And that is the end of chapter 3. As you see in chapter 2, the cure will be hard to find. And in chapter 3, the three friends started on their journey. Now starts some of the character building, which I think you need before you can grow the characters. You saw some of the normal life, and you know that normal life isn't so exciting. You saw some of the emotions or feelings of the characters. When you are writing, sometimes you want to jump right in, but you're building your story. You don't want to give too much away in the beginning. Of course, you don't want to go too slowly either. Some avid readers will read a book so much before they decide to continue or discontinue. I've heard some say 100 pages. Others will say so many chapters. The friend I have that said 100 pages also said that was what she used to do. But now she's in so many book clubs that unless it is a book for her book club, she doesn't read the first 100 pages unless it's good. It needs to hook her much earlier than that. As a writer, you can have a very exciting or inviting book, but still you won't have every reader in the world. Different people like different genres. I have a friend that likes action, and I don't write action. While there is action in my stories, it's not packed with action after action. So my friend is not one of my readers. That's fine. His preference doesn't mean my stories aren't good and my stories don't have an audience. As you let your friends read your chapters, remember this. Some friends will enjoy your work and give you valuable feedback. Some friends will be jealous and unduly critical. Some friends may like a different genre or not be a reader at all. Leave a comment as to how much you read of a book before it has to hook you. I hope you enjoyed chapters 2 and 3. Join me on Tuesday for observations and senses. Then join me Friday for chapter 4, the topic of magic. Like and subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications so we can continue writing together. soon between video days, you can visit my website at www.bymykela.com. When my professionals finish and get it up, we'll get to see that. Have fun writing your chapter 3 and 4 if you haven't done so already, or your 2 and 3 if you haven't done so already, and send them as PDF or Word document to writewithmykela@gmail.com. No Google Docs, please. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, please share it with them. This is Mykela with Write with Mykela. Bye for now.